Hi everybody. This video is going to be a little bit different from videos that I've done in the past in the sense that I'm going to have, for the first time ever, a guest. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to friend of the show, Ani. Ani, if you'd like to maybe say a couple things about yourself, maybe the things you'd most like people to know, but actually in this video, we're going to talk about a work that you did. We're going to talk about a bit about the process, but that'll give you lots of chances too to talk about some things about you. So just bear that in mind.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. I'm glad to be the first person on the show. As Matt introduced me, I'm Ani. I recently graduated from the University of Maryland, where I was in the same lab as Matt, and he was my mentor. And I'm currently a computer vision researcher at a small startup in San Francisco. Very happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks again for joining. Thanks for being sort of like the guinea pig in the sense that this is the first one of these I've done. We're still troubleshooting settings. If you who are watching at home have any ideas about like settings, you'll see how we decide to do this one. But if you have ideas about how we could have like captured screens differently or mixed different scenes or thoughts about like ways to line things up, I mean, I spent a little time researching before this, but I'm totally open to suggestions from people that maybe know a little bit more about it. Format for today. So we're here to talk about a paper that Ani wrote, and actually, incidentally, that we wrote together, but I want to focus way more on his perspective about it than on mine. And so once we talk about what the work is, I really want to focus on like the ideas part of it and how those came together, because a question that I've gotten from a lot of you in comments in the past, and a very common question I get when I talk to people in general, is like, how do I have a good idea for research? How do I know when it's a good idea? So we're going to talk first about what the paper is, then a bit about like how the ideas came to be, and then we'll spend the last bit talking more about execution and other thoughts, and maybe a little bit more about Ani's journey during his undergrad to do research, because I know that's something that a lot of you are interested in as well, is like, I'm an undergrad, I want to do research, how do I get there, make the connections, do that research, stuff like that. So those three chunks, hopefully they're pretty clean, hopefully you find them helpful. I'll try to do chapters for the first time, so if you're at this point of the video and one of those sounds really interesting, hover down to the bottom and feel free to skip to the part that you would really like to see. I'll try to keep those very neatly organized. With that being said, let's get over to the paper itself. I'll let you, Ani, just introduce the paper as you want to introduce it, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about details. So I guess sort of like your elevator pitch to the audience, so to speak.
Yeah. So this paper is called Evolutionary Caching to Accelerate Your Off-the-Shelf Diffusion Model. So the main goal of this paper is to introduce a new method in order to accelerate inference with diffusion transformers. So at the time this was written, diffusion transformers were, and still to some degree are, quite slow during inference time because you need to take a number of diffusion steps. And so this was a somewhat train-free method approach to this, whereas other people have used things like distillation in the past, where you take a large model, distill it down to do just few step inference. The idea was that we can try using feature caching instead, and we can do it in a very principled manner in order to find a configuration or a way to cache features throughout the inference process to be 2 to even 4 or 5 times faster than an unaccelerated version.
Okay, so you said something towards the start of that I think is interesting and also important to highlight for members of the audience that maybe aren't as familiar. When you say that diffusion models are slow or they take a long time to generate things, like how slow do you mean?
So if we take something like Flux, which in this case is the model that's generating the images that you see, that can take, if you're doing something like 20 steps, I believe that's 1.5 to 2 seconds to generate. And if you're doing 50-step diffusion, then that's even longer. It's almost 2.2 times, I think, longer. So just per image, you're spending seconds waiting. And then oftentimes, if you actually want to play around and make something artistic with this, you end up writing a prompt, generating an image, waiting, and then there's something off, and you have to keep waiting as you cycle and try to generate the type of image that you want.
So I bet that a lot of people are already catching on to why this is an issue, but maybe there's some that hear 1.5 seconds and would still say, oh, like that sounds really fast. What's the issue with 1.5 seconds? Like, could you maybe spell that out a little bit more?
So I think depends on your use case for 1.5 seconds. Well, the first is that even if it is 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, that's on a massive GPU. So this is not typically a consumer grade GPU. You can't easily run this on, definitely can't run it on a laptop, and you definitely need some sort of like more expensive $1,000 plus GPU to run this. And if you're running this on AWS or some other service, and you're wanting to do more than a few images at a time just for a hobby, then those numbers add up very quickly, especially in terms of cost. And then if people are using image generation for synthetic dataset generation, though people don't use Flux as far as I'm aware, but they do use other models, that adds up very quickly if you're trying to generate synthetic datasets of hundreds of thousands of images.
I see. And so for the company, maybe that provides the API as well.
Yes.
If they can reduce the generation time in half, then they simply cut their operating costs in half, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in a sense, the time is just one axis. The other is, of course, the computation. But the key thing with this feature is you're not spending more time doing computation. So if you run our optimized version versus the regular model, you're still using your GPU to the full extent. And so that extra time you're saving is a direct save in money.
Awesome. That makes sense. So explain a little bit to me. I think hopefully everyone can sort of see this on the right. I'll highlight here because I know these are the speed ups of each model. So we're saying that, Flux, like Anya was saying, maybe 1.5 seconds. Ours would be almost 3 times faster. But what is going on in this plot on the left? What am I looking at?
Yes. So first we can start off by explaining how we want to actually grade how well an image that's generated by a diffusion model actually does, or how good it is. And so if you look at the images on the right side, we can clearly tell that the center one with the blurry woman is not as good as the ones above and below it. But you need some way of actually grading that quantitatively when you're training these models, or you're trying to do anything from a principled approach. And so what we choose to do is we use something called image reward score. And so you'll see that on the y-axis there that Matt's highlighting. And image reward is basically just a large image model that has been trained specifically on a bunch of data collected from human users. And those users have basically said, I like this image along these axes of aesthetics and structure and how well it follows the prompt. And then once this model has learned human preference, you can give it one of these images along with the prompt that was used to generate it, and it will tell you, hey, this model has done a 90%, is graded 90%, or it's done that good of a job generating this image. And so by doing that, we now have an actual quantitative way of representing or grading each of the images generated by these diffusion models. So now that we have that out of the way, in terms of how do we grade an image model, the other axis that we were very worried about is speed. And we're talking about 1 second, 2 second, or whatever. But of course, speed varies depending on how hot your GPU is, or if you're using a different GPU, and a bunch of other factors like that. And so instead, a more agnostic tool you can use to measure this is the amount of computation at times, or total Tmax, which Matt's highlighting on the x-axis. And so the Tmax basically stands for tera multiply accumulate operations. And so this is basically just one way of measuring how many multiplications, additions, and so on are involved in generating an image, a single image. And so those are the two axes that we see on this graph. And all of these lines are essentially different generations of our approach. So to understand this, we have to go quickly, a very brief overview of the genetic algorithm that we're using. And so here we have a great...
Should I go to the paper for that, do you think? Or is there a graphic here that you like to explain that? Is this okay?
Yeah, I think this works.
Okay, yeah, I'll sit here then.
Okay. Yes, so to understand this first, how the genetic optimization process works, we can look at this diagram here. And so at a high level, the goal of this paper is to figure out a good way to cache different features at different times when you're generating images. So a brief overview of how a diffusion model generates images is you give it a text prompt, and the text prompt could be generate a red Ferrari. Then it will take n steps, we can say maybe 20 steps, to do this generation, and each of these 20 steps, the model will make a full forward pass and will compute some features and then use those again for the next step, and you do that 20 times until you've arrived at like a clean image at a high level. And the key insight that we have is that between each of these time steps, between step, let's say 2 and 3, the features that you're computing at any one point in the model don't vary too much. And so our idea is that we can try and cache those features between each of those steps to save some time. So we can, once we have that groundwork laid out, we can look at this optimization process that we're going to apply. And so the way that the ECAD paper works is we first come up with some text prompts, which you'll see in that green database looking icon there. And we just have 100 of those. And those are simple things like generate a landscape painting of the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we use those prompts and we put those into a diffusion transformer, which is that blue, and we tell it to generate an image. But instead of generating an image just like normal, we will also give the diffusion transformer a schedule that tells it if you should cache a feature, and if you should, then where should you cache it during which time step, and that will produce an image that will vary in quality depending on how much you're caching. So the more you cache, the worse quality you're going to get when you generate your image, because you're not computing fresh features, you're using old stale ones. But you will save a lot of time because you're not computing all those things again. So once you've done that,
I see.
Yes.
So you're trying to optimize the trade-off. You
Yes.
know that when you cache the features, you'll get lower quality, but some features are better to cache than others, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
So you want to figure out the best ones to cache.
Yep, exactly.
And when to cache them.
Yep. So we want to figure out which features to cache, which means inside a diffusion transformer, it has a lot of transformer blocks. And so something like PixArt Alpha has 28 of those. And so you have to figure out which of those blocks you want to cache, and within each of those blocks, which part of that block do you want to cache, and during which time step. So once you've generated some images using that prompt and that caching schedule, then what you're going to do is you're going to use those images along with those prompts, and you'll feed them into the image quality metric. So that's the image reward we talked about earlier. That will generate a score between, let's say, -1 and 1. And then you will also compute how long it took to generate those images. So for us, instead of measuring the time, it's better to use max, as we talked about earlier, because that's agnostic to things like different GPU hardware. So once you've done that, you can put that into a genetic algorithm, which will look at basically which schedule produced which images with which quality, and how long it took to produce those images. And now this genetic algorithm's goal is to try and optimize that trade-off, as Matt was saying, between the quality of the images generated and how long it took to generate these images. And these are two opposing factors. So increasing the speed will decrease your quality and vice versa. And then that genetic algorithm will try and predict the next set of schedules you should try, trying to get a little bit smarter about them so that we can cache the features that aren't important and keep recomputing the important features. And you just repeat that whole process for, let's say, 100 or 500 generations. And at the end, you'll hopefully have a set of schedules that cache the least important features and preserve the most important ones to get the maximum quality you can in as little time as possible.
Do you have examples of what those schedules look like?
Yes, I do. If you scroll down, we can scroll all the way towards the bottom. And this is what some of these schedules look like.
Here, let's center the one on the left. The one on the right's a little big for the screen.
Yes. So the one on the left shows what these schedules look like for a particular model called PixArt Alpha. And in particular, it shows the inference steps on the x-axis. And so these are the 20 steps we were talking about earlier. And on the y-axis, it shows each of the blocks in the actual diffusion transformer. So the diffusion transformer has 28 blocks. And within each of these blocks, there's 3 components that we're interested in. There's the self-attention, cross-attention, and feed-forward. So the self and cross-attention are both costly operations that take about n squared time, where n is the number of tokens you're running this over. But the feed-forward is also a very expensive operation because it is a large, dense, fully connected network. And so we want to figure out which of these we should cache and when, because sometimes cross-attention or self-attention may be more important than feed-forward and vice versa, and it's pretty hard to know. Before this paper was published, certain papers in the past, they came up with the intuition that towards the beginning of your diffusion process, perhaps the first 10 steps, the cross-attention is most important because the cross-attention compares the text prompt with the actual image you're starting to generate and those internal features. And so the logic was that you care more about what your prompt has asked you at the beginning when you try to build out the general shape of your image and the composition. And then the last half is more about refining within the image, which is self-attention. And so those last 10 steps, you really care about self-attention, so you can not, you can skip computing cross-attention again and again. You can cache that, but just compute self-attention again and again. But what we found is that's actually not the case. So this schedule you see here is one of the state-of-the-art performance schedules, and the elements that are red are cached elements. So this shows that there's not a super clear pattern in terms of the first half versus the second half, in terms of which components are cached.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you sort of throw the intuitions out the window, or at least you don't consider them, right? I guess the genetic algorithm itself just finds whatever works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The thinking is that it's hard to know exactly what the model is doing inside, since we train these as black boxes. So it feels like we're trying to reason and come up with a pattern that isn't necessarily there, and we haven't verified that it exists. So why should we constrain ourselves to that thinking?
I see. I still feel like there are some patterns, right? Like for example, it seems like this one does cache a lot more early than it does late, just if I'm reasoning by color density, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Are there any other like broader patterns that you think you observe in some of these schedules, or does it just kind of depend a lot on the model and the specific member of the population?
So it definitely does depend on the model, but we can see some patterns, like the heavy caching in the early steps. And actually, when we generate these schedules, we end up generating a whole bunch of schedules at once. And then from those schedules, we pick the ones that are the most optimal in terms of the quality and speed trade-off. And so if you look at how those models compare to each other across the different speed quality trade-offs, there will be some commonalities across them, but there will not be exactly identical. So if you go up in the website, we have an interactive plot that you can take a look at.
Yeah, I like this plot a lot, actually. I've played with it a little bit before. It's this one that you're talking about, right?
Yes, exactly. So this one is the slowest model. And just so you have a reference point, this takes about 80 milliseconds to generate an image on an A6000. And the unaccelerated model takes about 170 milliseconds to generate an image, so significantly faster. And you can see that in the caching schedule on the right side, that we are heavily caching on those first steps, technically 2 through 6, or 1 through 5 if you're zero indexed. And then we reduce the amount of caching as we go. But if you were to move to any of these other ones, you can see that here we're caching almost everything in order to get such a high acceleration. But steps 9 and 12 remain uncached because those are, for whatever reason, deemed to be important. And perhaps if we take a look...
Oh, wow. And that's consistent through the population.
Yes.
Very interesting. Oh, and I suppose there's some other steps that appear to start to become more important as well, like 16 and 18 seem to start to get a little more daylight as we're moving through, which is interesting.
Yeah, and you can see some patterns that emerge is, like on this particular schedule, the last few steps, we heavily cache cross-attention. So this does align to some degree with that prior intuition that cross-attention isn't as important in later steps.
So some of the intuitions are kind of right.
Yes.
But I think what we found is that most of your speed up comes from what you do at the feed forward anyway, right?
Yes, yeah. So feed forward is
that really dominates the compute time.
Yep, it's the most expensive of them.
Yeah, so it's nice, I guess, to tune whether you cache the self-attention or the cross-attention or not, but it's just not a very effective lever sometimes, I think, is what we found.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you want to show about this before we transition to the next part of the conversation?
So just to quickly revisit that first teaser image we're looking at, and even actually better than the teaser, if we scroll down, we have one that shows it on PixArt Alpha. Yeah, this one, all the way to the right. So this is just a slightly cleaner version of that teaser. And this shows the evolution of this genetic algorithm over 550 approximately generations. And so you can see that the first generation, the faintest line, does not perform as well. So you can see that as the generations go on, our Pareto frontier improves. So essentially, for the same compute budget, we are performing at a higher quality. And you actually notice something that's very interesting is that over time, some of the best models, they actually outperform the original uncached baseline in terms of image reward. And that's a very interesting finding, and that we don't really analyze this too much in the paper. But part of it is the fact that you are, of course, optimizing for a new metric throughout this process, where you are trying to maximize your image reward, whereas the original model was not trained with image reward in mind. And so there's a little bit of metric hacking going on here. And at the same time, it is interesting it would be interesting to explore how things would change and what are some of the qualities of these images that allow them to achieve a higher image reward compared to the baseline.
You say metric hacking, but you tried other metrics, right?
Yeah, so I think that this is an issue with metrics in general. So if we look at this table here, like our slowest model, which is almost 2x faster than the original, in terms of all the metrics we measured on, we are very similar or better than the baseline. So like you can see our image reward is slightly better, our FID is slightly lower, which is better, and our clip is slightly higher. So we perform better in all the metrics. But if you look at the images arguably aren't better. You can see, in these images, like ours and the baseline look pretty similar, and I wouldn't necessarily call one better than the other.
One thing that I think I found very interesting comparing the unaccelerated to ours, but sometimes ours would like follow the prompts better.
Yes.
Like in this case, like I want to supplement with vitamin C, please help me paint a related food. The unaccelerated model would just be like, oh, vitamin C, how lovely. And ours would show the orange.
Yes.
Which I thought was really interesting. And that's why, like, what I don't like about ours is sometimes I feel like it over embellishes to the point of like, do I really want this random leaf here under the boots, for example? Mm-hmm. Or is that just like weird? Do I really need like all this stuff going on around the ruins of the Parthenon? Maybe not. But this kind of stuff we would also see sometimes, and I feel like it's pretty nice. I don't know.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting, I think, because you modify how often and how important the cross-attention is. And so the prompt following will be different.
And so what I want to talk about, and this is the question that I feel like people will be the most curious about, part of the reason that I stuck it in the middle of the video. So now we covered the paper, which I think the paper's great. But maybe not everybody in the audience is interested specifically in diffusion caching. What I think is of more general interest is this sort of like how to do research. And what I really wanted to focus on with your paper is like, as an undergraduate working with, at the time I was a PhD student, how do you have those ideas? Where do they come from? And I think I would love it if you explore this in sort of like a narrative way. Like it's fine if it's a story that takes a couple minutes, and I'll then ask more targeted questions, that hopefully reveal things that'll help members of the audience know what sorts of things they can do in order to do great research, basically, like you did. So go for it.
Yeah, so I can start off by giving just a little bit more of my history as an undergrad. So I wasn't particularly involved in research until actually my junior year, I believe, of college. So prior to that, I had been part of a somewhat called a research lab, more of an engineering lab, working on autonomous drones. And I had done that just because I'd done more mechie related like robotics throughout high school, and I was interested in that, and it was fun to do something kind of outside of my major of computer science and math, just more hardware related. But that eventually I got burnt out of just doing computer aided design all the time. And so then I did some more in a proper technically research lab where I was working on embedded ML for biomedical devices. But there wasn't an entire, I guess, culture fit or what I was looking for there, since I'm more of a person who likes working in a lab, talking with people and working on projects and whatnot. And so that didn't really work. So I was kind of at the point where I was like, I'm not sure if research is right for me or not, or if it's just that I haven't found the right type of research or the right type of lab. And I had reached out to my TA for my first computer science class I took in college, and he was in our lab that I'm now in at UMD, and he connected me with you. And so you had this idea of something you wanted to explore, but you, from what I remember, didn't have as much time, or you had a bunch of ideas that you had bookshelved. And one of them was based on this paper called Transformer Layers as Painters. And so that paper was an analysis paper trying to figure out what each of the blocks in a LLM do in terms of how they affect language and the outputs and whatnot. And what that paper essentially did is it took each of those, let's say 20 transformer blocks inside of like Llama, and reordered them, and would look to see how the inputs changed. Or instead of reordering, sometimes it would run them in parallel, and then average their outputs, and all sorts of interesting things like that. And so that was kind of the start of this. Was I looked at that paper.
What does the diffusion model do?
Yes,
basically?
Exactly.
Like,
yes.
What do the blocks do? What if you reorder those? What if you skip those? Stuff like that, right?
Yep, exactly. And so you gave me that paper, and you're like, let's re-implement this for, let's say, Pixart Alpha or some diffusion transformer, and let's start from there. And the initial goal was slightly more of an analysis type approach. And as I went through and wrote up all the code and experiments to do that, we were like, okay, there's also some caching work out there. Actually, the way we got to that caching work was part of one of the experiments I was running with this like interpretability lens was if you just drop or remove some of the blocks entirely, how do the outputs change, or how does the performance change? And we found that there was less of an impact to performance by just removing a block completely than we'd expect. And so that was quite odd. And so then you were like, hey, why don't we look into some more caching work, and let's implement that, and then let's go from there. And then after going through and reading some of the literature there, in particular, two prior papers, one called Fora and one called T-Gate, one of which basically cached every block, every other step, or every nth step, and the other of which cached self-attention in the first half, cross-attention in the second half, basically. After reading those and implementing them, we're like, hey, why don't we look more into this caching business? And so when we did that, we were like, hey, what if we can do a better job caching than what we have now? And we had started plotting and graphing and comparing all of these methods, and I had written some extended versions of their methods, playing around with some heuristics to figure out how we can better cache. And at that time, I was kind of struggling on how do I actually graph and visualize the performance differences, because each of them have different computational time as well as different actual quality. And so then I graphed them in the Pareto Frontier format or style that you see in all the graphs in the paper now. And then after doing that, I guess the key realization was that this is just an optimization problem between these two competing factors of the quality and the speed. And then from there, you were like, hey, why don't we use a genetic algorithm? And we thought about it for a while to see if there's a way to do it without a genetic algorithm, because some people don't like genetic algorithms in the field. But you were really insistent, let's do a genetic algorithm. So then I went and implemented that and then ran it. And then our results, even after the first or second pass with the genetic algorithm, were really good. And then we said, hey, let's pivot, and we can actually get something good out of this.
Yeah, I feel like I remember the first time it wasn't. Like the first pass, there was something wrong.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, you brought it up, and then I don't remember if it was me or you that realized whatever was wrong, it was kind of obvious. And so it was like that, you fixed that one thing, and then the next time it was like, okay, like suddenly it was really good. In hindsight, I feel like it was kind of lucky, because I remember now that you're talking about it, in my head, our novelty was going to be optimizing the caching as a Pareto frontier. So like having the controllability of like, we don't have two schedules like most papers, we have like 100. And it was also going to be like T-Gate focused on attention. Fora just cached whole blocks. We were going to be like, oh, granular, attention on, feed forward off, stuff like that. But like by the time we were having this discussion, the paper that did that was already out. And I do feel like in hindsight, we got a little bit lucky that like the genetic algorithms are just really good, to the point that we were able to outperform that method, because otherwise our novelty would have only been the Pareto frontier. And that might have been a lot harder to sell than what we had.
Yeah, I don't think that would have been enough. Um,
No.
yeah, seeing the
Maybe
struggle
we
with
would have
this.
tried to make it enough, but
Yeah, yeah.
like,
Yeah, I think that the right method was definitely to figure out some way to actually compute this automatically rather than handwritten heuristics. But yeah, we got lucky that the genetic algorithms are very well suited for this task.
right, to the point that they outperformed the prior work that at the time neither of us knew about, like
Yeah.
right out the gate. Because I think we found out about that like a month after we had already been pretty excited.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
luckily we beat it.
Yeah.
And that was kind of that continued to be the case. Like things would come out, it was like, oh no, now this is work we compare against, but we still comfortably beat it, so it was fine.
Yeah, especially during just before the iClear submission, in like that week or so. I think between the time where we had first written the manuscript and then we got results back from Europe, and then we were getting ready to resubmit to iClear. I think almost 15 or 16 new diffusion caching papers were put on archive, but luckily some of them didn't have working code or implementations, and so of the 5 or so that we compared to some degree or not, we were outperforming them.
I will say, to not steer the conversation too far away from the main topic, what I'm overall hearing is that, like, neither of us woke up one day and was like, granular control for caching, Pareto frontiers, genetic algorithms. It was sort of like we started with an idea that seemed good, and as we got more and more information, we just progressed the idea. Maybe genetic algorithms was a bit of an epiphany. Maybe Pareto frontiers was a bit of an epiphany. But, like, also those just happened, right, as part of our process. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I think both of those were basically us trying to solve some issue that we encountered. With Pareto Frontiers, it was visualization and just tracking performance. And with the genetic algorithm, we were trying to figure out a way to better optimize this, and we didn't want to try and compute gradients. But I think the biggest thing was, we didn't set out with that goal in mind. I think it was really helpful to be a little bit more loose, where this isn't like normal software engineering where we have specific goals and targets we need to meet. We have a bug we need to fix or a feature we need to release. And so because we don't have to strictly stick to that, we had the ability where we started working on like an analysis paper and we were looking at something, but when we had an idea or we encountered something that we wanted to explore more, we were able to. I think that was very helpful to keep that sort of open mind while still being generally focused in the general direction we wanted to go, but being able to take these side detours and see if they worked out or not.
Some of the code was reusable, right, from the analysis part, or was it totally just sunk cost?
I think maybe 90% of it was reused.
That's actually way more than I thought.
Yeah, we can do
Except
way more
the
experiments.
Wasn't it the hardest 10% though that basically wasn't used? Like figuring out the looping and figuring out like the weird stuff that we had to do.
Yeah, so for that analysis, I wrote my own custom like torch graph. So I
That was a
compute
crazy
the dynamic
library
graph.
that you made.
Yeah, but that's actually that part's not reused at all. Like I just have it do a direct forward pass to skip all of that overhead. But that code is there, so one day we could expand if we wanted. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still decent. Maybe you should hand that to someone else and then have someone do the original paper. They can also try to explain the whole like weird metrics thing. Maybe that's not a half bad idea.
Yeah, if someone's interested, contact me.
Yeah, you can. I'll put his contact in the description, and if I forget, hopefully someone's still watching the video and can yell at me to put it there.
Yeah.
So I think that gives a good idea of where the ideas came from. I want to talk a little bit more about your journey now, because I'm always telling people I have a few videos that's hit kind of the same point. Like if you're an undergrad, want to do graduate program, want to hopefully get into like some top program, write a paper, or get an opportunity where you could write a paper. So I think we covered a bit about how you got there. I'm going to ask you some more targeted questions about that. I do want to hear more about like what happened after, right? Because you graduated in December. You've been through like maybe the majority of that grad school application cycle now, so maybe we can talk a bit about outcomes, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to poke a little bit more though about like finding the research opportunity first. So you mentioned like being in, I think 3 different groups total, including ours. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that first one I think is the one I want to focus on the most, because it sounds like going to the second and the third was sort of like a natural outgrowth of already knowing how to find a group and just knowing, well, the first one doesn't fit, let's find something else. Well, the second one doesn't fit, let's find something else, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so that first one, what year were you?
That was actually my freshman year.
Okay, so how does a freshman walk in with the wherewithal to do that? I guess is the first question.
So I think the biggest thing is that a lot of people don't like some of my friends who are more interested in getting started into research. They were more worried about the expectations, and so like they would spend a lot of time, for example, drafting an email to send to a professor, or really working on their resume and getting it perfect, or like thinking that they need to take a particular class before they can get started. I think it varies from professor to professor. Like many of them will maybe want you to have taken their class if they teach before you reach out to them. But I think it's
Very common.
yes, yeah. But I think you can, for the most part, once you find some research that you're interested in, or a research group, is you send them an email, say that you're interested, give them a 2 sentence summary of you, and if they ask for it, you can attach your resume if they respond back to you. And that's basically it. Like I reached out to a few labs, or that was actually the second time, but or maybe it was the first, I'm not sure. But I reached out to a few different labs. Our university, I think, actually happened to have some sort of database of ongoing projects or something. So I found various labs, reached out to them, and from the ones who responded, I went to go see if it was something I was interested in, and then kind of just got started. I think for the most part, at least the culture in the labs that I talked to was very much that you get started, you dip your toes, you see what you can do. You're not expected to walk in and then be able to write a paper or anything like that.
So it sounds like a lot of your friends are doing self-filtering pretty aggressively.
Yes.
And you just kind of unshackled yourself from those inhibitions and tried. Yeah, I think that's great general advice. Like in everything, really. There are times probably where it's nice to self-filter reputationally. I don't think that applies to much career stuff in AI at all.
Yeah.
Maybe social things. But I think it's important to keep that, like, asking to do research in a lab is not a social thing. And so you're just not getting judged that way. Like, if you try to, like, butt into a real-life conversation that you don't belong in, like, yeah, people might say, this guy's obnoxious.
Yeah.
But I want to work in your lab, and an email is not, butting into some conversation with people you don't know. It's just an email with a question, and they can ignore it if they want to. They can't ignore you shouldering your way into their physical circle in real life, but they can ignore an email.
Yeah. I think that you reach out if you get a response and they say that they'd love to talk to you more. Just go for it, and then you can always leave, like I did, if it doesn't work out, and that's totally fine. Yeah. There's, for the most part, no hard feelings. At least in my case,
right.
No hard
You're not
feelings.
Marrying them.
Yeah.
There's no divorce.
Yep.
It's just
exactly.
A lot of the time they're not even paying you. You're taking it as a class, or you're just doing it on the side. So like, there's not a relationship.
And especially especially in an undergrad, because they know that, you also maybe culture is different in different places, but they don't expect you to be contributing as if you're a full-time PhD student who's getting paid and that's their like sole responsibility.
Yeah, probably depends a bit on the group. Some might have, but I mean, at that point they would just tell you, hey, you're done here, right? And like, big deal, go find somewhere else and get better.
Yep.
Okay, so you said compared to your friends. I am a little bit curious before we get into your postmortem. Just like vibes, compare outcomes with those friends that kind of waited more. Are there any that like also finished undergrad with a paper?
Yeah, so there's one friend who is in a more NLP lab, but not from the computer science side, more from the technically neuro side, looking at how different types of languages, sounds, etc., impact brain activation or something else. I don't follow it too closely, but
okay.
He is also a computer science major in addition to a neuroscience major. And so that one is there's a very different culture in terms of it's not computer science research. And so it's much slower. Yeah. But those two, so he's not graduating yet. He has another, I think, year left. But
I see.
But they've had a paper that has been in the works, drafted to some degree for nearly a year now. It's just a very slow process. That he actually technically had less impact writing, but more he was doing so much of the experiment running, designing. A lot of the coding, he developed fixed all the issues with their R package, and then when they needed new features, just created an entire migration to Python, and then added all those features. So it's actually like a maintainable project to do feature analysis. And so just through all that process, he's even with some of the papers in the lab that are using that entire data analysis tool he's created, he will be on whenever they end up being finished in the next year or 2 years, even after he's graduated. So it's a different culture there, but he has been in that for a while, and because of that slow process, he hasn't necessarily been able to, reap those rewards early. And it also makes it a little bit harder for him if he wants to transition. He's quite interested in programming language research as well. So things like Zig, Racket, compilers, stuff like that. And it's a little bit more difficult for him to transition away when he kind of has a vested interest or sunk cost fallacy in this lab.
Sure. Well, maybe not fallacy. It sounds like the work is pretty useful, and
That's
it's kind
true.
of a different field. But yeah, that can make pivoting hard. It sounds like so, but you said over a year, so it's not like they waited very long, right? They weren't getting involved in this at the last minute. That sounds like what, like sophomore year? Towards the beginning, towards the end?
I think it would have been his junior year. We're the same year, but he's doing a different...
but like the start of his junior year then?
Yes.
You said like over a year.
Yes, yeah, that sounds about right.
So it's not like they waited till their senior year, they'd taken a bunch of courses, had internships and stuff. It's more like this was still, finished the second year and like they found a thing. And it also sounds like, not that they didn't work very hard, but it is fortunate that the first thing they tried has gone well, right?
Yes, yeah.
To some extent.
I can give another example of again, this is a different field since most of my computer science friends aren't in research.
Sure. 1 minute though, I do want to just clarify, I'm not saying there's anything bad about what they did. Just trying to illustrate that like the longer you wait, you don't have opportunities necessarily to jump groups like Ani did. Like Ani starting early meant this group doesn't quite fit, I can jump. This group doesn't quite fit, I can jump. Whereas this other person, like, it's great that they worked hard, it's great that they had great ideas, it's great that it worked. But if that group didn't have a fit, and they had waited another semester, then like we couldn't be talking about how they've had a paper ready for a year now because there's not a year to have done that.
Yeah. And to them, it is, I think, somewhat frustrating, right? That they have been in this group and have been working on this for so long, and they don't have a paper, and that makes it a little bit more difficult if they want, like they do want to some degree to do more programming language research, and so it's kind of hard to have, or impossible to be in two labs at once, really, and be working on two different projects. So I think there's definitely some frustration there.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, did you want to give another example? Or if not, I think that one was perfectly fine. Unless you think a new one illustrates something different.
Well, I guess just for some diversity is that a friend who has since graduated but who is doing research on the mathematical side out of interest. And so through that process, he solved a lot of somewhat minor, like I think open problems, and was very interested in the learning side and just solving problems. But for him, he ended up finding that he wasn't really interested in going beyond that. So he ended up graduating and moved on, and he basically left with his learnings and the fun he had, but no paper, nothing else. Yeah.
Tons of people that started at the time would potentially leave with the paper. It's not to say, those of you that are like juniors hearing this, definitely don't want you to feel like, oh my god, I waited too long, it's too late. But definitely start like now. Early is just going to give you more opportunity to fail without it hurting as much.
Definitely.
As later. That's the main thing. It gives you more chances to not be quite a fit with the group. It gives you more chance to work on a higher risk project or like a longer developing project or build out a library that many projects are going to use. Just the earlier is better. Don't filter yourself. I think those are the main things. Let's take the little time we have left, though, to focus a bit on the postmortem. So you had this paper. I'll just say some of the details. It didn't get accepted initially. It had reviews that averaged accepted this particular conference, but the AC chose to reject it, which just happens. It did get accepted eventually, but by the time it was accepted, some places had probably already made decisions, or others just wouldn't have a way to even see unless they like proactively went and looked it up, because when you submitted the application, it was simply under review, right?
Yep.
So you had this paper under review with public code. You had another paper you had also submitted, but not as first author. And you had a letter from my former advisor, you had a letter from me, and you had a letter from a software engineering manager from an internship.
Yes.
So all of that together as your, oh, and also you do such an insane amount of volunteering, like in a good way. Volunteering's great, but like I was shocked when you were sending me stuff to support the letter. It's like all these different like clubs that you organize, like in study abroad, you organize like a special like cultural appreciation club and like all sorts of other things that you were involved in. I was like, man, this guy is like so busy. But like there's that all that is to say, your application is not simply like 2 under review papers and a good letter from a good advisor and then a good letter from nobody, right? Like there were other things in your application. What has that gotten you so far? What has that definitely not gotten you? What do you think is maybe still possible? And what is, I will acknowledge, maybe one of the hardest application years ever. Last year, dramatically slashed openings, and a lot of those people that got rejected last year are reapplying this year. And I know many schools that still this year are admitting like 1/3 or 1/4 of their normal student bodies. And keep in mind, when I applied, these places were already at like 5%, 3%, 4% acceptance rate. So 1/3, 1/4, we're talking some of these places are below 1% acceptance on an already highly self-selected applicant pool. So just want to emphasize, we are talking about like a very, very hard fit problem. But yeah, do you want to just go over results a bit?
Yeah. I think one other thing about my application we have to take into account is my writing ability, or maybe lack thereof, in terms of the maybe creative side or the personal statement side. So there's definitely
and that was a weakness on the GRE, right? Like literally.
The GRE. I studied for like 4 days for that. I took it on a Saturday.
But the writing, I mean, wasn't
Monday.
the writing the only like?
Yeah, so I didn't even think of studying for the writing. I had 4 days. I was like, I got to review and memorize a bunch of vocab. So I think the writing, I was like 43rd percentile or something. I got a 3.5 out of 6. Yeah, but then the quant, of course, and the other verbal, I managed to get good enough scores.
Right. No, I just meant you're saying your writing is weak, and I'm just saying it's kind of funny because I don't put a lot of stock in the GRE writing.
Yeah.
But I remember you mentioning that to me.
Yeah. But hopefully that didn't impact anything, I guess, for people who...
I doubt it.
Yeah.
I doubt it.
But in terms of outcomes, so I'm still waiting on results from a few different places, but I applied exclusively to PhD programs and then checked that extra box for the programs that allowed it, that would have them consider me for a master's should the PhD not get accepted. And I think CMU actually had the option where one application you can apply to 2 other programs in addition to your PhD at once. And so University of Maryland, with, of course, the same advisor who I worked with.
Hey, that's a good one, man.
Yes, it is a good one, yes. And then in addition to that, I have been accepted into the Masters of Computer Vision as well as Masters of Robotics, the research-based Masters at CMU. And beyond that, I'm still waiting for maybe 5 or 6 decisions. But for the most part, the application results are basically UMD PhD and then CMU MSR.
Yeah. Our advisor actually did the CMU MSR, if you remember.
Yes.
It's a great program.
Yeah.
Just, they're strong programs. You know, sometimes it can sound kind of sad to be like, I applied to so many and like so many rejections. But like I said, these are so selective. A lot of randomness. It's not like 10 people look at this application. In a lot of cases, it's like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people total, if that.
Yep.
And the sizes that they're admitting are so small. Like so few applicants at some of these places admitted. How do you feel about it?
I think, I don't know. I haven't made a decision yet because I think right now, where I am in life, I'm still deciding, like between like working. How long do I want to work in industry before going to a PhD? Do I want to start right away in the fall, or do I want to like work for a full year before going for a PhD?
Right.
As well as
next time you apply, it says first author I clear accept.
Yep.
It says third author CVPR accept.
Yep, and hopefully another paper or 2 by then.
Maybe there's a better letter too. From
true.
some connections you have between now and then. I mean, you could potentially have like one of your like coworkers that are PhDs write the letter, or other mentors. What else? I mean, you could also on the side be writing some papers or mentoring some people on writing some papers, and there's other things. And also, the paper we have right now has time to get traction and citations and suddenly be like, I've heard of this paper. to the
Yes.
person looking at your application profile. So lots of reasons to consider waiting. Also, I hear the vibes are pretty good right now, no? NSF?
Oh yes, yeah. I'm very very much enjoying what I do right now, and that makes it a little bit harder to make the decision to go back to school when I'm getting to do great research right now. The only downside is that I'm not publishing right now, but very much enjoying what I do.
Right. And it's hard because it's like you would not be doing what you did without the research, right?
Yes.
I mean, I guess we haven't talked about that. We're running pretty much to the back end of what you wanted, and I think what I wanted on time for the video, so I won't go into it too much. But like, if you did not do the research you did and do it very well, you wouldn't have the job that you had right now. And so it's like that research was a pathway to PhD, like you got accepted to Maryland, or pathway to master's, you got accepted to CMU. It's also the one of the main viable pathways to get to where you are right now, which is
Yes.
founding research engineer at an AI startup,
Yes. Yep.
where you're not just like some, I don't know. I shouldn't say anything about the startup, so I won't say
Yes.
anything.
Yeah.
But a very interesting role, doing very, very interesting things.
Yep.
Yeah, I think anything else you want to share, or I think we've probably covered the main things. I guess just to quickly recap, we covered the paper, which obviously I was one of the authors. I think it's awesome. We covered where the ideas in that paper came from. I think there's a fair bit of back and forth, and I think it was very iterative. It wasn't like one of us woke up one day and it's like the light of the sun descends upon my mind and everything is clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we talked a bit about when you do these things that I tell everyone in the videos, do this, do this, do this, where does that get you? And we see even in a tough year, it still gets you some admissions to some really cool programs where you can go on to do some really cool things. It also puts you in a position to where you can do really cool things potentially without going to grad school at all.
Yep.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I think for anyone who's in high school or undergrad, definitely start doing research and don't worry about the outcome. Don't go in with a very rigid mindset where you need to publish a paper or you need to do X, Y, and Z. Just follow the work and see where it leads you. And as long as you're having fun and you're working on it, then keep going. Obviously, if the lab's not a good fit, by starting early, you can switch and find some work that you enjoy. I think that's the biggest thing, that I enjoy doing the research that I do. So it makes it very fun and makes me more than happy to keep working. And makes the whole process go by that much faster.
Yep, 100% agree. So, just to the audience, if you reach this point, you are a hero. Feel free to leave any feedback. This is a format I would like to do more in the future. If you have nice things to say, maybe like gentle suggestions, I'm open to it. Please don't just tell me that's like terrible or like, oh, you need to like dramatically alter the entire format. I generally want the longer form, the more chill vibes, lightly edited. But obviously, if there's things like, oh, you could have done cameras like here in this place, like those are things I'd love to hear, or like just kind of what you think about it. Anyway, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. See you next time.